I'm going to be talking about the 5 reasons for dysphoria, but I'm going to be phrasing it, and the whole video is effectively phrased like it's a hypothesis, because I do not know. There's no good scientific research on this, despite this very clearly being the case. Now, sure, I'm willing to admit that this might not encompass every single trans person, but it does encompass around 99% of trans people. It's encompassed every trans person I have ever seen perfectly. It describes every trans person I have ever met, over 200 trans people, perfectly. There is no vague comparison. It is an exact likeness. But I am willing to admit that there might be people who do not fall into these 5 categories. I just haven't seen them. It is because of this that I will not be making solid claims. I will just be guessing at what is the best course of action given the things I have personally witnessed. But this is in no way medical advice, and it is not a claim, it is a hypothesis. So please understand that I am just guessing because we have not correctly studied this. And my last video goes into why we haven't studied this and why we probably won't study it for a while. So I am going to go into my hypothesis behind where the dysphoria comes from for each of these 5 categories, but I do not think I should go into any sort of treatments because we haven't studied this whatsoever. So to think that I know what a treatment might be, that's absurd. I will say there might be common sense treatment paths. For instance, if I talk about someone who's borderline, they might want to go into DBT because DBT has been shown to help people with borderline personality disorder. And so that might be a potential treatment path. I'm not going to recommend that. I'm not recommending anything. I'm just saying that there might be common sense treatment paths for each of these, but I'm not going to say what they are. So the first group I'm going to talk about is the group I am a part of. Of course, I'm actually a part of possibly 3 of these groups, but at least 2 of these groups. But this is one of them that I am a part of, and it involves cluster B personality people. These are the borderlines, the narcissists, the antisocials, and the histrionics. These are people who fall into these personality disorders. Borderline people have innately an unstable sense of self, and they almost always feel some sense of unease, like something is wrong. And so there's this, I would say, narrative in the trans space that goes something like, if you feel something is wrong and has been wrong your whole life, maybe it's your identity, maybe it's your gender identity, and of course BPD people have an unstable sense of identity, and if you just change your identity to the right identity and fix your dysphoria, then you'll feel better. And a lot of times BPD people can have all sorts of dysphoria, gender dysphoria even, naturally because of the disorder. And because they're borderline, they actually exhibit many other sorts of different disorders like autism or narcissism or psychosis or depression. They exhibit a lot of different symptoms, which is why they are called borderlines, because they are sort of on the borderline between all of these different illnesses. And so everything I say about those can also in some way apply to people with BPD. Next, we're going to talk about grandiose narcissists. So grandiose narcissists, I would say, are the most likely to be AGP, right? They love themselves. They love themselves more than anyone else. They love the idea of being in a relationship with themselves. So they get a partner out of it. Additionally, they get a ton of attention, which narcissists love. And so it's like a double win for grandiose narcissists. It's just a natural path for them. And they also oftentimes get to be little cult leaders of their own little groups, right? And so you might have a Discord server as a grandiose narcissist, or you might have a YouTube channel as a grandiose narcissist. I'm not, but you understand what I'm saying. There's a lot of grandiose narcissists out there, and they have YouTube channels, and they're very successful. They're natural-born cult leaders, basically, and so they do well in that space. So for grandiose narcissists, it's kind of weird. I believe that porn at a young age causes the grandiose narcissist at a very young age to have this sort of feminine fantasy of themselves due to the sexualization of women, the attention that women get. Grandiose narcissists crave it. But then, later in life, the grandiose narcissist gets into a relationship and has some trauma in that relationship. And then the grandiose narcissist never again wants to have a relationship with anyone else other than themselves. These two things combine to create the better version of the narcissist. The better version being, it would be at my best form. I would be in my best form if I were a woman, if I could be in a relationship with myself as a woman. And so then the gender dysphoria develops from that. Then you have the insecure narcissists and the histrionics. So these people love the infinite well of victimization that comes with being trans. They are the most marginalized, right? I'm trans, and so they can pull from this infinite well of victimization. And they also get a ton of attention and drama, which they love. So it's perfect for insecure narcissists and histrionic people. I feel like they both fall into that. If you go on Twitter, many of the trans people who are on Twitter fall into this insecure narcissist, histrionic personality disorder. They are the trans rights activists, basically. They are the ones who are always making drama, always making everything about them. It is exactly what histrionic and insecure narcissists love to do, and they are always the victim. And lastly, we have antisocial people. Antisocial people are very interesting. I've met a few of them, and the way they go about it is very different. They hate everyone so much that they really can't have a relationship. And so, like the grandiose narcissist, they sort of have a relationship with themselves. But the thing is, they don't like that either. And so oftentimes they try hormones and then immediately stop. I've seen this a couple times with many antisocial people. They'll try hormones and then they'll stop. And they basically cannot keep it up. And they have no social group, so they have very little social contagion influence. And so a lot of the times they try hormones and then stop, and then they end up moving on to something else. And so the antisocial people, from what I've seen, don't last long in transition very, very often. They get in and then they get out. Okay, so that's the first group. The second group are the delusional and psychotic people. This is very simple. They really believe that they are in the wrong body. They are born in the wrong body. They often come about this through messaging, like maybe they're watching YouTube videos and they'll believe that the trans person is talking directly to them. Or they'll be in a Discord server and they'll be following this grandiose narcissist at the top, and they'll believe that the grandiose narcissist is talking specifically to them and wants a relationship with them and wants them to become their true selves. I've seen this several times, and basically it's some sort of paranoid messaging where they believe that they are actually being told by some person or some force to transition because they are in the wrong body. This one's very simple, so it doesn't need any more explanation. It almost always follows that exact pattern. And so obviously if they think they're in the wrong body, they develop dysphoria, they want to transition. But from what I have seen is once you treat the underlying psychoses or delusions, then you treat the dysphoria and they no longer want to transition, as was the case in a schizophrenic man I knew who treated the underlying schizophrenia and suddenly no longer wanted to transition, did not think he was a girl. The next one I used to call internalized homophobia, and I've now changed it to shame about sexuality or gender nonconformity, because that's what it's really about. It's about shame. It's about shame from society, shame from your parents. You're not supposed to be gay. They don't have to say that, but you can feel it, right? You're not supposed to be gender nonconforming. They don't have to say it. They just need to take you to a gender therapist when you're 8, like they did to Laverne Cox, and like they did to that one Rebecca Brisahoff. These people, they're so gender nonconforming. Everyone points it out their whole life, and then their parents take them to a therapist, and the therapist is trying to. The kid gets it. The kid, on some level, understands there's something wrong with the way I'm acting, and this causes some deep shame from a very young age, and it's very hard then to discern what is true. It's like, you feel so much shame for it. It's like you can't even fathom the fact that you're gay. You can't even fathom the fact that you're supposed to be a guy who's just gender nonconforming. You can't fathom it because it's just been suppressed and suppressed and suppressed, sort of very covertly in the subtext of your whole life. The shame can manifest in many different ways. One of the ways it manifests is that you get body dysphoria, gender dysphoria. You feel like you would be better in society instead of as a gay man, a straight woman. You feel like you are supposed to be a woman after a while because it's how you have been your whole life, and everyone's pointed out that there's something weird about it, but there isn't, right? And it really it becomes a case that you really feel like you're supposed to be a woman, because that's sort of the message everyone has been telling you your whole life. And unfortunately, it's just not the case, but it does feel like it is. Okay, so now we're into trauma. So trauma seems to cause body dysphoria, gender dysphoria. For instance, if you're traumatized and you're a woman, I have seen many women feel fear of growing up, developing as a female might, breasts and stuff. The attention that would come from that. Or men might worry about going bald and having to take on a certain role in society, especially if they're a very feminine man. They might, effectively worry about having to suppress their whole personality for the rest of their life, because it just doesn't fit into what society currently accepts for men who are past a certain age. And so there's this fear, but there's also this disgust from both sides. There's a disgust and there's a fear. The fear from aging as a certain sex and developing in a way that people can identify that you are supposed to be at a certain point in your development. And then disgust that comes from the fact that you know this, you feel this, and you direct it towards one body part, whether it's your breasts, or it's your hair, or it's your body hair, or it's your voice. You have this sort of disgust that develops because you want to sort of hide those traits. And then eventually, with the trans ideology, this is exactly what gender dysphoria is described as. You hear about this stuff, you fall into it. So trauma is one of those that's like, it's just an immediate pathway right into transitioning a lot of the time. So I think we can all understand that women who get sexually abused, they don't want the attention from men. They are afraid of it happening again, so they would like to disassociate from femininity in their body and be a man so that they don't have that happen to them again. We all understand that that is very concrete. It makes a lot of sense. This happens to men too, though, and that's why I'm bringing this up. Men, usually around a later age, although it could happen at any age, I suppose, but usually from what I saw, it happened around high school, where they're very feminine men, and they actually get abused oftentimes by other men sexually in very strange ways, where it's not necessarily fully non-consensual, but it's really messed up how it happens. These men are basically treated by other men as women, but the other men are very abusive, and they treat them as basically toys. They use them, they discard them, and so these men are treated like women, like toys, and then for whatever reason, the man in this position, it does something really weird to the psyche. From what I've seen, it makes them want to relive that in all of their future relationships. They are feminizing themselves. They want to transition. They want to be put in that position again and again and again. They want to be abused and used, and they want to be a toy. It's very weird and sad, and they're very clearly very damaged from this experience. And for whatever reason, they seek it out again. I know that this is something that can occur with trauma, but I didn't realize until I met these people how direct it is. Like, I don't think they put two and two together, but from an outsider's perspective, they're basically trying to recreate the trauma they experienced. The last one is autistic people, and the autistic people, I would say, are the most complex of this whole group. They have so many different ways that it presents. One of the ways is that autistic people, you can look this up, they're more likely to become addicted to pornography, but also they're less able to discern the difference between them and the pornography, right? So they'll start identifying with that pornography. And however it happens, but they eventually maybe start watching lesbian porn or something, or they'll start watching any type of porn, and they'll happen to start identifying with the female person in that pornographic film, and so they'll feel like that's supposed to be how they are, and so they'll start mimicking those people. They'll start acting like those people. They'll start wearing the clothes those people wear, going into positions that those people would go into. And then this is why you see a lot of autistic people go from presenting rather gender conforming right over to presenting like very stereotypically like stripper like, right? Because it they're pulling all of this information from porn a lot of the time, or very sexualized imagery, and they are feeling like that is what they're supposed to be doing. And women can have this exact same issue. Obviously, I was talking about men who are autistic, but women who are autistic, they can begin identifying with gay male couples that they're reading about or watching. There are certain things, certain pornography that is made for women that involve gay men for whatever reason, and the women will read or watch videos or read books about these often young gay men. And so then they can become, in the same way that the men start identifying as the women in the porn, the autistic women can start identifying as these gay men. And so the autistic women will start to want to be a gay man. Additionally, and this is what makes it so complex, is that autistic people can have sensory issues about body hair, right, on their arms or something, facial hair. They have all sorts of sensory issues. They can also want specific clothing that fits a specific way due to sensory issues. And it can even go as far as scent. So like men, and trust me, we really do smell different, especially after being off estrogen. I smell totally different than I did. And so there is a definite scent component that autistic people are very aware of, and it's a very big relief for them when they go on, say, estrogen as a man. They lose that scent, and so that's one less sensory issue they have to deal with. And then also, autistic people can also kind of mirror all the personality disorders, right? If the autistic person is around people who have a personality disorder, the autistic person can sort of take on those traits. And when they take on those traits, they will then start to develop the dysphoria that those personality disorders start to develop in the same exact way. For instance, if they're around a grandiose narcissist, they may begin to develop autogynephilia. If they're around a borderline, they may begin to start flipping between identities very rapidly. If they're around insecure narcissists, they may become trans rights activists, etc., etc., etc. And so this mirroring, both in the porn and how they sort of mirror the porn, but the mirroring as well in the sort of personality disorders, comes together to create gender dysphoria. And then you layer on top of all that, and this is why it's so complex, the fact that oftentimes autistic people are very gender non-conforming anyway, because they don't necessarily pick up on all the gender cues. And so they can just naturally not really listen to the gender roles quite as much as someone else might. And so, yeah, it's a little complicated. And I would say that all of those come together, different parts of those come together for different autistic people. To sort of wrap this all up, I would say that most people who transition probably fall into more than one category. Like for me, I probably fall into borderline category, the shame about gender nonconformity, and trauma, right? So I fall into 3 at least, and who knows, I might fall into more. I've seen people who fall into the autistic and internalized homophobia sort of category. I've seen people who fall into the trauma and autistic category. I've seen all sorts of different things. Grandiose narcissists who've been traumatized in relationships. They no longer trust people. They no longer feel like people deserve them. So now they're autogynephiles. They only love themselves due to the trauma. And it manifests sort of perfectly in that grandiose narcissistic state. So you can see how they can kind of work together to create gender dysphoria. I don't think a grandiose narcissist in general by itself would become trans. I think that a grandiose narcissist who has had a bad relationship and realizes that everyone else doesn't deserve me, I'm too good for everyone, they would start to sort of fantasize about themselves, because who's better than them, right? So you can see how these can all sort of intermingle, all of these different 5 categories. It's very often the case people are in multiple ones. And so what's the solution? What's the solution to all of this? The solution is that we need to be treating these individually, not as one thing called gender dysphoria, but as each individual thing, whether it's trauma or autism or cluster B personality disorders or shame or delusional psychotic types like schizophrenics, whatever it might be. We need to treat it as it is with the current treatment methods that we have for these people, or we need to develop new treatment paths for these people, for specifically their condition, additionally with gender dysphoria, and having them in some way get back in touch with their body, learn to accept themselves as they are. And the reason I think that we should do it this way is because even if transitioning were a perfect treatment path, which it certainly is not, they would still have their underlying issues to deal with. Even if it treated the dysphoria, they'd still have the underlying issue that caused the dysphoria in the first place. And so I think it's better to just treat the dysphoria and the condition at the same time, because I believe that they stem from, this dysphoria stems from the condition. And so if you treat the condition, you should be treating the dysphoria. Some of these people will never be treated. You're not going to get grandiose narcissists to be treated. It's going to be kind of hard to treat internalized homophobia. So these are things we have to think about. We have to get a little creative on. So yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought. And I have not thought about all of these categories very much. I codified this a long time ago. So it's almost certainly the case that I missed some stuff, or that there could have been some stuff that I went into more detail on, obviously. But I'm just laying the groundwork for someone someday to look at this and go, okay, this is probably true to some extent. Like, you can tell, you can see it in every single trans person that walks through the door in terms of therapy. They have one of these things going on in their life. And so this should be looked into, and it should be considered before putting people on a treatment path that can hurt them health-wise and is very likely not what they actually need. Once again, thank you for watching. I very much appreciate you humoring me. I realize I am speaking absolutely out of my depth on this video, but someone has to, because currently we're in the dark ages. And as always, thank you so much to all of my patrons who are helping make this channel better. Thank you.